how do you reconcile this relatively interventionist strategy, let's say, with the minimalist approach to government intervention that often characterizes conservatism, right? And so, you can see a philosophical conundrum there, but then you can also see a practical conundrum, because a conservative skeptic might say, well, what you're implementing is another bureaucratic growth community that's going to expand at the rate of 10% a year indefinitely with dubious outcome. Like, it's just, tell me how you reconcile that philosophically, and then tell me what you think you guys have done to, what would you say, protect against the pitfalls that might accrue as a consequence of building another adjunct to the healthcare system.
Right. So the healthcare system, fundamentally, the entire premise of peace, order, and good governance comes from the idea that each of us have dignity unto itself. Conservatism, I would say, from my mind, is not a form of libertarianism. Conservatism is fundamentally an idea that people have intrinsic dignity, that we should labor towards the common good. And so one of the lies that we've been told in addiction across North America, and it's really true when you look at this sort of radical activist claim on the progressive left, is that Canadians have a choice. You can either be compassionate towards those in addiction or have safe communities, right? And Canadians, as you said, are level-minded, reasonable people that want to trust their institutions and want to trust the authorities. It's a part of the heritage that we grew out of as a part of a colony within the British Empire. The institutions we've built have largely worked up to now. Of course we want to do that. And that is the lie. That is the false dichotomy that's there. In fact, caring for those who are in addiction and being compassionate towards them and having safe communities are one and the same. Because there's nothing compassionate about having the individual who is not in any moral way a free agent, choosing to drink water or not the way you and I have today, choosing whether or not to vote for the Conservatives or the Liberals. There is no free agency in that same way for those who are suffering, who are in the worst articulations of active addiction. And so society needs to intervene in that sense, because they're vulnerable in the same way that we would want to protect anyone who is vulnerable, especially if we talk about those who are underage. We talk about those who have been compromised, and don't have the agency, and the capacity to make decisions for themselves. That is what a well-ordered state does. And it does it through compassionate mechanisms. So first of all, the lie has been put there in the first place. So you have to choose between the two. But it's not enabling
compassion. Like, it's really important to distinguish between compassion and enabling. I mean, the psychoanalysts have been doing that for like 100 years. If your brand of compassion is, okay, dear, you can do whatever terrible thing you want, and I won't intervene because I don't want to hurt your feelings, that's not compassion. I don't even know how to describe that well. It's enabling. It's a devouring form of enabling. Yeah. And so, like, the compassionate thing often to do with someone who's in real trouble is to use judgment. Yeah. Right. And to think, well, no, that's pretty much got to come to a stop. This is not acceptable and we need to do something about it. And so that's partly why I think the Alberta approach is so interesting.
Francis George, an American clergyman, once said that fundamentally our society is one that permits and allows and encourages everything, but forgives nothing. And I think that there's something really transcendent about that. It's fully on display here. That fundamentally the idea of the addiction anthropology adopted by the left is that those in addiction, we need to sort of continue to palliate their addiction indefinitely with higher and higher powered opioids. That's the most radical articulation of what was called harm reduction, and in that state becomes a harm production, right? That's not the case. From my perspective, is that instead of just saying everything's permitted, like, an important redress to addiction is that there are consequences for actions. Now, I'm not saying this as a minister of justice. I don't want to criminalize this, but continuing to just destroy your life and cause threats and harm to your community more broadly shouldn't be permitted in society. And the consequence of that is going to be an intervention.
Right, so that's the conservative edge of it, I would say, philosophically as well, is that these tent encampments, these gang encampments are threats to civil order. Like, fundamentally, on the criminal side, on the civil side, also with regard to their capacity to undermine our sense of a high-trust society. And a high-trust society is an incredibly valuable resource. And
fleeting.
And easy to disrupt, like terribly easy to disrupt. And it's just not acceptable for the public landscape to be littered with what would you say? with the evidence of systemic and civilizational collapse in the form of homeless people who are completely overcome by their fentanyl-induced pathology.
And so
there's nothing about that that's acceptable.
That fentanyl-induced pathology, as you describe it, I would say, as a public communicator, that individual that overdosed 186 times, the 187th time might be death, right? And so the alternative to treatment is tragedy. And those are our two options here, which is why I'm going to be introducing legislation next spring.
Tragedy by omission. That's the complex thing. We can just let you die or help you die.
Well, I mean, that's the assumptions that they've said. There's no problem with just continuing to facilitate addiction as long as it's a safe drug indefinitely. That's not my assumption. My assumption is instead that life is valuable. It has dignity. We ought to help it. We ought to help all individuals, and healthcare should heal and not harm, which these assumptions are radical when you talk about the public health policies across all of, Canada for sure. I'm going to be introducing legislation called compassion intervention. And so if somebody is a danger to themselves or others, due to their substance use or addiction within a reasonable amount of time are going to cause harm to themselves or others, then it's our society's responsibility to intervene. Because the alternative to that intervention is tragedy, it's death, it could be harm to community.
It's also other forms of societal intervention, because those people are going to come to the attention of the public health or the healthcare system at some point in the ER, or they're going to come to the attention of the police and the judicial authorities. There isn't an obvious no intervention pathway here.